Most men do not think. They merely rearrange echoes and call the noise their own voice. The world praises intelligence, yet drowns every act of true thought in ridicule, fear, or polite indifference. To think is to wound one's own illusion. To see is to lose one's place among the blind. And so, the majority live comfortably inside the fog of imitation, a fog they defend as identity, morality, and sanity. Ask yourself with brutal honesty, when was the last time you had a thought that was not borrowed, not recycled from a teacher, a screen, a slogan, or a book you did not truly digest but memorized to sound alive? We do not think, we repeat. We echo the opinions of the herd, clothe them in clever words, and mistake conformity for conviction. What we call belief is often nothing more than social camouflage, a desperate need to blend into the great gray of collective approval. The herd praises the individual, but only after he is dead, when his independence can no longer threaten their comfort. The living thinker is hated, for he disturbs the narcotic of agreement. He forces others to feel the cold air of uncertainty. And nothing terrifies the herd more than the idea that no one truly knows. To think for oneself is to suffer voluntarily. It is to burn the scaffolding of borrowed certainty and stand naked before the abyss of existence. The crowd fears this solitude more than death itself. For to stand alone in thought is to feel what the animal in man resists, that life has no inherent meaning, no divine choreography, only the blind will, endlessly hungering, endlessly repeating. The world does not want thinkers, it wants obedient echoes. It rewards the clever mimic, not the honest seer. Schools teach memory, not insight. Institutions preach conformity under the mask of virtue. And yet, every now and then, a strange consciousness awakens. A man who stops repeating. A soul who, in some quiet night of despair, asks the forbidden question, is any of this mine? That is where thought begins in betrayal. To think is to betray the world that made you. It is to renounce your inheritance of noise. It is to turn against your species' deepest instinct, to belong. The thinker walks out of the cave not into light, but into a darker night, where everything familiar dissolves. Look around you. Every person performs a role. They smile as they were taught to smile, desire as they were taught to desire, hate as they were told to hate. They defend their habits as freedom, their obedience as duty. But strip away the costumes, the accents, the rituals, and you find the same trembling creature, terrified of being alone with its own mind. That is why the true thinker is never popular. He is a reminder that thought has a cost, that clarity demands isolation. The masses seek connection. The thinker seeks truth. The first finds warmth, the second finds winter. Do not mistake this for cynicism, it is anatomy. Humanity's tragedy is not its cruelty, but its imitation. We worship our reflections and call them gods. We seek approval not from conscience, but from echo chambers. We call this morality, yet it is only fear wearing a halo. So now, before you go further, ask yourself the question that defines your soul. Are you a thinker or a follower dressed in borrowed thoughts? Because once you begin to think, truly think, there is no return. The mirrors shatter. The light you once called hope turns into a cold awareness that everything you've built was scaffolding around an empty space. And yet, in that emptiness, something extraordinary happens. The illusion dies and the self begins to live. But first, you must descend. Beneath the calm surface of human life, there runs a single current, the will, blind, insatiable, without purpose or morality. It drives the bird to build its nest, the beast to hunt, the man to lust, to chase, to conquer, to weep. The will knows no peace. It hungers through every form it inhabits, from worm to emperor, from child to saint. And man, foolish creature, calls its servitude freedom. Quote, "We like to imagine ourselves as rational beings, guided by ideals and reason. But reason is the servant, not the master. The will moves first, desire speaks, and thought obeys. Every philosophy is born from temperament. Every conviction is a rearranged appetite. Even our most moral acts are often clever disguises for the will's hunger, for power, for love, for recognition, for immortality. The herd moves not because it understands, but because it fears being still. Modern society, a vast mechanism of distraction, feeds on this fear. It tells you what to want, when to want it, and how to display your wanting in ways that benefit the machine. Education molds minds not to think, but to function, Media feeds hunger not for knowledge, but for noise. Religion soothes the will by promising meaning where there is none. Everything conspires to keep you asleep because the awake do not serve efficiently. The machinery of obedience is elegant. It gives the illusion of choice. 1,000 brands, 1,000,000 opinions, but all orbiting the same sun, the need to belong. Even rebellion is prepackaged. You can buy your individuality in convenient forms, clothing styles, ideologies, spiritual hashtags, each promising uniqueness while ensuring uniformity. The greatest trick of the herd is to make you believe you are free while binding you with invisible chains opinions. Status, identity, fear of exclusion. Man would rather live enslaved among others than free and alone. And so, the few who attempt to think find themselves punished not by force, but by exile. The crowd withdraws its warmth. Isolation becomes the philosopher's crucifixion. To think is to be alone, yet to not think is to never live. Watch how people argue. They defend not truth, but tribe. They cling to ideas, not because they are convinced, but because they are terrified of losing the scaffolding of belonging. To question the herd's faith, be it political, moral, or cultural, is to commit social suicide. Thus, they defend illusions as if they were life itself. But the thinker must see what others cannot bear to see, that almost everything we call meaning is an invention of fear. The will creates morality to regulate its own chaos. It creates hope to escape its own despair. It creates civilization to decorate its cage. And yet, in moments of rare lucidity, we see the absurdity. We see the endless repetition, the will chasing its own tail, the crowd worshipping shadows. We realize that beneath all our striving lies one truth. The will does not want peace. It wants to want. Here lies the thinker's first despair, the recognition that freedom is an illusion, and the human being is not the master, but the instrument of the will. You may call it nature, instinct, divine order, but it remains the same blind hunger. This knowledge burns. It strips away pride. It makes one silent. And in that silence begins the faintest taste of liberation. For once you see the strings, you no longer dance willingly. Civilization prides itself on progress. But what is progress, if not the refinement of illusion? The primitive man worshipped fire and feared thunder. The modern man worships opinion and fears silence. Both kneel before forces they do not understand. Both construct elaborate rituals to distract themselves from the futility of being. We congratulate ourselves on enlightenment, yet our temples are screens, our priests are influencers, and our gods are algorithms whispering, "You are the center." It is not knowledge that defines modernity, but see the speed with which ignorance spreads. Humanity no longer contemplates, it scrolls. The average mind has been trained not to think, but to react to consume fragments of emotion masquerading as ideas. What was once conversation has become performance. Everyone speaks, but no one listens. Everyone argues, but no one understands. Each opinion is a flag, each disagreement a war. We live in an age where conviction is measured not by depth, but by volume. The crowd mistakes noise for thought, and distraction for life. The modern world has perfected a new form of slavery, voluntary servitude. No one chains you, they merely offer you comfort. You carry your prison in your pocket. The device glows, hums, distracts promising connection, delivering emptiness. Every notification whispers the same command: do not be alone with your thoughts. The tragedy of the modern soul is that it has lost the capacity for silence. We fear boredom because in boredom the will is exposed naked, restless, unsatisfied. So we fill every moment with noise, every pause with stimulation, until the very act of reflection feels unnatural. This is the new world order, not governed by tyrants, but by impulses. The masses obey not through fear of punishment, but through addiction to pleasure. They do not revolt because they are entertained. Bread and circuses, repackaged as convenience and content. The result is a species that confuses movement with meaning, reaction with understanding, stimulation with purpose. We are told we live in the age of information. But information is not wisdom. The flood of data has drowned discernment. The thinker, once a rare figure of solitude, now drowns in noise. Opinions multiply, but truth remains buried beneath them. The more people talk of enlightenment, the further they drift from light. The world has never been so connected, and never so lost. Observe the culture of happiness. Every poster, every sermon, every influencer repeats the same gospel. Be positive, smile, manifest. It is the religion of comfort, a doctrine designed to protect the will from self-awareness. The modern cult of positivity is not healing. It is denial disguised as virtue. It teaches you to paint your chains gold and call it freedom. It commands you to suppress suffering rather than understand it. It promises vibration and manifestation, yet demands conformity to the same hollow rhythm. To be unhappy today is heresy. To express despair is to be labeled broken, ungrateful, or negative. Society demands that you anesthetize your soul, smile through agony, and call it resilience. But suffering in Schopenhauer's world is not a defect, it is the essence of existence. To reject it is to reject life itself. The one who sees suffering clearly is not sick, he is honest. The one who denies it, smiling through his wounds, is not healthy. He is deluded. There is nothing noble in blind optimism. It is the cowardice of the will, the desperate attempt to polish existence rather than perceive it. True clarity begins when hope collapses under the weight of reality. For only when illusion dies does the soul awaken to truth, not the truth of comfort, but the truth of necessity. Even art, once the mirror of transcendence, has been drafted into the service of the herd. Once, art existed to reveal the ineffable. Now, it exists to distract. The painter no longer seeks truth but attention. The poet no longer writes to understand life, but to be understood by algorithms. The crowd demands beauty without sorrow, passion without silence, meaning without suffering. But art without suffering is decoration. It soothes the nerves, but not the soul. In the modern marketplace of identity, the self has become a brand. You are no longer a person, you are a performance. Every gesture, every preference, every belief is curated to attract validation. We no longer live for truth, but for reaction. Be yourself, they say, but what they mean is, be the version of yourself that pleases the crowd. Authenticity has become another costume. Even rebellion is commodified prepackaged dissent, sold to those too afraid to stand alone. The thinker watches this and feels the weight of nausea, not moral outrage, but metaphysical exhaustion. For he sees that the world's noise is not progress, but panic. A civilization desperate to forget the emptiness at its core. We mistake our fever for vitality, our chaos for creativity. We are the only species that destroys its own peace for entertainment. In this endless carnival where the will disguises itself as choice, the soul suffocates. And yet there is a strange comfort in seeing the machinery exposed. The thinker's despair becomes his liberation. When he sees that all of culture's promises are illusions, progress, happiness, success, meaning he no longer needs to chase them. He ceases to run, he ceases to pretend. Clarity is a wound, but one that never lies. The thinker bears this wound with pride. He knows the price of truth is isolation. He knows the reward of illusion is belonging. But he also knows that belonging bought with self-betrayal is spiritual death. To awaken in such a world is not victory, it is exile. Yet, in that exile, the thinker becomes real. He may lose comfort, but he gains sight. And what he sees, no matter how bleak, is his own. The beauty of modern despair is that it forces one to choose, to return to the herd and forget, or to remain awake and face the silence. Most return. The few who remain become philosophers. They no longer seek meaning, they seek clarity. They no longer worship progress, they observe its absurdity. And yet, for all its madness, this age has a hidden grace. It makes hypocrisy visible. The masks have become so numerous, they reveal the face beneath. The endless performance exposes its own emptiness. In this lies a strange redemption that the very excess of illusion awakens a hunger for truth. The thinker does not despise the world for its falseness. He uses its falseness to sharpen his sight. He knows that the will can be resisted only by understanding it, that modernity's madness is not new, merely louder, that the same hunger that drove ancient kings now drives the modern consumer. The names change, the will does not. So he watches the spectacle without contempt. He observes the actors, politicians, prophets, influencers, all performing the same ancient drama, the will selling itself as meaning. And he smiles, not with superiority, but with weary recognition. He has seen through the lie. He knows that behind every promise of happiness stands the same blind force, the will to live, the will to appear, the will to continue. He does not curse it, he simply ceases to obey. And in that refusal, quiet, invisible, absolute, he becomes free. The thinker does not choose his path. He awakens into it as if consciousness itself were a wound that refuses to close. One morning, he discovers that he can no longer live as others live, nor believe as others believe. The noise that once comforted him now burns. The lies that once inspired him now taste of ash. He walks among men as one returned from the dead, unable to join their laughter. It is not superiority that isolates him, it is perception. He sees too much, too clearly, and in that clarity, every illusion collapses. To see the world as it is, not as it pretends to be, is not joy. It is disillusionment. Every comfort reveals its shadow. Every desire reveals its chain. He looks upon humanity striving for wealth, fame, love, faith, and sees in it the same engine of suffering, endlessly disguising itself as purpose. The crowd calls this cynicism, but it is not. It is the sobering of a soul that has tasted truth and found it bitter. Solitude becomes his only homeland, not the loneliness of absence, but the silence of awareness. The crowd cannot follow him here, for the crowd needs noise to feel alive. The thinker's solitude is not chosen for virtue. It is chosen because everything else feels false. He learns that to think deeply is to estrange oneself from the species. He becomes a foreigner in his own world, a creature walking through fog, speaking a language no one remembers. This solitude is not romantic. It is heavy. It breaks the spirit before it purifies it. For a time, he resents it. He reaches out to others, hoping to share his sight, only to find their eyes sealed by comfort. He realizes that truth cannot be shared, it can only be endured. And so, he withdraws not from contempt, but from necessity. To remain among the sleeping too long is to begin dreaming again. He studies his suffering as a scientist studies disease not to cure it, but to understand it. He sees that the will is the author of pain, and that every desire is a debt that existence demands payment for. The will promises happiness only to prolong striving. When the object is attained, satisfaction vanishes, leaving only a new hunger in its place. The thinker sees this cycle, desire, attainment, boredom, desire, and feels the absurdity of it all. He watches humanity chase its own tail, naming its exhaustion purpose. This realization does not make him superior. It makes him humble and unbearably weary. For to know that all striving is futile is to feel the exhaustion of the entire species, to feel the suffering of life as one's own. The thinker's empathy is his curse. He bleeds for the world that cannot see. He begins to understand why most people never awaken. Illusion is a kindness evolution bestowed upon the herd, the necessary narcotic to keep the will alive. To strip it away is to confront existence naked, without anesthetic. It is to stare into the abyss and realize that the abyss is not an enemy, but a mirror. And yet, in the midst of despair, a strange beauty emerges. He begins to see suffering differently, not as punishment, but as purification. Pain is not the enemy of life. It is life unveiling itself. Through pain, the will becomes visible. Through pain, one sees the mechanism beneath joy, ambition, and love. Suffering is the lens through which existence reveals its structure. The thinker learns to stop fleeing it. He studies it, absorbs it, becomes intimate with it. He no longer asks, "How do I end my pain?" but rather, "What is this pain showing me?" This is the beginning of transcendence, not through denial, but through lucidity. He sees that joy, too, is suffering, disguised the will momentarily pleased with itself. That pleasure and pain are not opposites, but two faces of the same blind force. Every delight contains the seed of longing. Every triumph carries decay within it. The thinker ceases to celebrate happiness as victory. He treats it as whether fleeting, untrustworthy, and beautiful only because it passes. The crowd, of course, cannot understand this. They believe he has gone mad, a melancholy fool who refuses joy. But they mistake clarity for madness. They cannot see that their laughter depends on forgetting, while his silence depends on remembering. The thinker's sadness is not depression, it is perception. To know too much of the truth is to grieve perpetually for what could never be. Still, there are moments quiet, translucent moments when the thinker feels something resembling peace. It is not happiness, but relief. The relief of no longer pretending. The relief of carrying no false hope. The relief of having seen the machinery and accepted its coldness. It is the strange calm of a man who has stopped fighting the storm because he knows the storm is all there is. This peace is not granted by the world. it is born in defiance of it. The thinker finds solace not in pleasure, but in perspective, the ability to watch the play of life without needing to rewrite the script. He becomes, in Schopenhauer's sense, an observer of the will rather than its slave. He watches desire rise and fade, joy bloom and rot, time build and destroy all without clinging. This detachment is not apathy, it is mastery. It is not the numbness of the broken, but the composure of the awakened. The thinker no longer seeks control over life, for he knows life itself is the storm. He no longer seeks to be understood, for understanding is rare and unnecessary. He no longer seeks peace through escape, for he sees that even escape is another form of desire. He has crossed the border between seeking and seeing, and once crossed, there is no return. From here on, solitude is no longer prison, it becomes sanctuary. Pain is no longer curse, it becomes teacher. Existence is no longer problem, it becomes mirror. The thinker ceases to pray for deliverance and begins to observe the divine irony that life's greatest truths hide inside what the world most fears: stillness, suffering, and silence. The thinker learns to walk through despair as one walks through fog, not resisting, not rushing, but moving quietly until form returns to the shapeless. He sees that despair itself is only the shadow cast by the dying of illusion. The deeper it cuts, the brighter the truth beneath. And so, slowly, he stops searching for meaning. He understands that to demand meaning from existence is to misunderstand existence. The will does not speak in reasons, it simply moves. Meaning is the consolation of the frightened. Truth needs no explanation, it merely is. This is the thinker's final education, the surrender of interpretation, the acceptance that life cannot be solved, only seen. In that surrender, something rare blooms: serenity, not joy, not hope, but a quiet lucidity that neither clings nor condemns. He who no longer seeks comfort has found freedom. He who no longer seeks meaning has found peace. He who no longer seeks self has found clarity. The thinker stands at the edge of the human dream and sees the machinery of suffering for what it is, a divine absurdity. And in that sight he bows, not in despair, but in reverence. For to see the truth, even if it wounds, is to touch eternity. There comes a point in every true thinker's journey when even thought itself begins to rot in his hands. He realizes that the very act of trying to understand is another trick of the will, another hunger disguised as reason. The mind, that proud instrument of philosophy, reveals itself as another servant of desire. It wants to grasp, to define, to possess even the truth. But truth cannot be possessed. It can only be surrendered to. In this final silence, the thinker stands before the last illusion, himself. The mind, so long engaged in dissecting the world, now turns upon its own shadow. Who is the one that thinks? It asks. Who suffers? Who seeks? And in that inquiry, something begins to collapse. The cherished center of experience dissolves like mist in the morning. What he called self was only the will observing itself through the thin veil of consciousness. There is no observer separate from the observed. There is only seeing infinite, impersonal, unending. The thinker, stripped of every mask, discovers that he was never the author of his thoughts, never the master of his will, never the captain of his fate. He was merely a form through which the eternal will expressed itself. His ambitions, fears, beliefs, all mere ripples on the surface of an infinite ocean. The great tragedy and the great liberation are one and the same. There is no one here. To the unawakened, this realization sounds like annihilation. To the thinker, it is freedom beyond measure. For what dies is only illusion, the illusion of separateness, of control, of I. What remains is a stillness that cannot be disturbed because it was never born. The thinker ceases to identify with thought, emotion, or desire. He becomes the space in which they appear and disappear. In Schopenhauer's language, this is the negation of the will, the moment when the striving of existence folds back upon itself and falls silent. The will, having exhausted its illusions, gazes into its own futility and, for the first time, rests. This is not the peace of conquest, but the peace of surrender. It is not victory, but cessation. The world remains what it always was: blind, restless, cruelly beautiful, but the one who sees it no longer trembles. He looks upon existence now with the same calm that the sea holds after a storm. The waves still rise, the winds still howl, but within him there is no resistance. He does not oppose the world, nor does he celebrate it. He simply witnesses. The distinction between joy and sorrow, life and death, self and world, all dissolve into the same rhythm. There is only being. In this stillness, even the concept of meaning disappears. The thinker no longer asks why. He understands that the question itself was the final trick of the will, the craving for reason where none is needed. Existence does not justify itself. It does not need to. It simply is vast, silent, self-sufficient. To demand meaning from it was to assume it lacked something. Now he sees that nothing was ever missing. The tragedy and the beauty of life were never separate. He begins to perceive the world as pure appearance, the eternal dance of forms without substance. The suffering that once crushed him now appears as waves upon the ocean of being. He feels compassion, not attachment. He acts, but without motive. He loves, but without demand. This is not indifference, it is transcendence. It is what Schopenhauer called the quiet kingdom, where the will has become still, and the intellect no longer serves desire, but observes eternity. In this kingdom, there is no longer a thinker or a follower. The test dissolves with the tester, for in truth, both were illusions born from the same dream. The thinker dies before he dies, and thus he lives unchained. He walks through the same world, but he no longer belongs to it. Pleasure no longer seduces, pain no longer enslaves. He looks upon the suffering of others not with pity, but with understanding, as one who knows that pain is the fabric of existence itself. He does not preach, for words cannot awaken those who have not yet suffered enough to listen. He simply embodies silence. His presence itself becomes a mirror in which others may glimpse their own illusion. What remains is simplicity. The thinker, once tormented by endless questions, now moves with the quiet rhythm of necessity. He eats, sleeps, breathes, and smiles, not because he hopes for reward, but because he no longer resists life's design. The same sun that burns also illuminates. The same world that wounds also reveals. He no longer divides existence into good and evil, meaning and chaos. He sees that all opposites are one movement, the pulse of the same blind will that once tormented him and now stands unveiled. This is not enlightenment in the sentimental sense. It is not bliss. It is sobriety, the last and purest form of peace. The thinker does not escape the world. He outgrows it. His consciousness no longer bends toward desire, but toward observation. He sees, at last, that liberation was never something to be achieved. It was always the space in which everything occurred. And so, the thinker returns to silence, not out of despair, but reverence. For silence is not emptiness, it is completion. It is the sound of the will resting after eons of striving. Now, when he walks among men, he no longer asks, thinker or follower. He sees that question for what it was, the rope bridge over the abyss. To cross it was to leave behind the illusion of choice altogether. The follower fears the silence, the thinker embraces it. But beyond both stands the one who is the silence itself. In this final understanding, words fail. Philosophy collapses. All distinctions dissolve. What remains is a vast, clear awareness, infinite, indifferent, compassionate. The thinker smiles at the futility of thought, at the vanity of ambition, at the comedy of existence. He has become what he once sought, the witness beyond the will. He looks upon the world one last time, the crowd still chasing shadows, the herd still worshipping noise, and feels no anger, no sadness, no pride, only stillness. For he knows that every soul, no matter how lost, will one day be forced by suffering to see as he now sees. And so, he closes his eyes not in defeat, but in serenity. The storm still rages, but he no longer stands apart from it. He is the storm, and the silence that follows. The test is complete. There was never a thinker. There was never a follower. Only the will, dreaming itself awake. And in that awakening, all striving ends.